A blizzard claimed everything that night: a police cruiser, a dying officer, and the last shred of safety in Millbrook, Colorado. But when war veteran Daniel Cross pulled Officer Emily Harper from that frozen wreckage, he didn't just save her life, he ignited a chain of events that would expose a deadly conspiracy and forge an unbreakable family from the ashes of betrayal. Follow this heart-pounding journey to the very end and comment on your city below, so I can see how far this story of courage, love, and redemption has traveled across our nation. The howling wind carved through Millbrook like a knife through flesh, and Daniel Cross knew this storm would claim lives before dawn. He'd seen enough death in Afghanistan to recognize its approach, the eerie silence between gusts, the way even the trees seemed to hold their breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. "Shadow, stay close," Daniel called to his German shepherd as they trudged through knee-deep snow along Highway 34. The dog's black and tan coat was already dusted white, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the darkness with military precision that mirrored his master's training. They were heading home from the feed store, their truck abandoned 2 miles back, where the road became impassable. Daniel's 11-year-old son Ethan was safe at home, probably glued to his video games, blissfully unaware that his father was fighting through what the Weather Service was calling the worst blizzard in Colorado history. The wind died suddenly, and in that moment of crystalline silence, Shadow's ears snapped forward. A low whine escaped his throat, not fear, but recognition of something Daniel's human senses hadn't yet detected. "What is it, boy?" Shadow bounded ahead, his paws barely making a sound in the powder. Daniel followed his breath, forming ice crystals in the -20 air. The familiar weight of his service pistol pressed against his hip beneath his winter coat. Old habits from a war that never really ended. Then he saw it. The police cruiser had caromed off the highway and slammed into a massive pine tree, its front end crumpled like an accordion. Steam rose from the engine block, but the vehicle's lights were dark, its radio silent. In this wilderness 20 miles from town, it might as well have crashed on the moon. "Jesus," Daniel whispered, breaking into a run. Shadow was already at the driver's side door, pawing at the window and whimpering. Through the spider-webbed glass, Daniel could make out a figure slumped over the steering wheel, dark hair, the distinctive silhouette of a police uniform. The door was jammed, warped from the impact. Daniel grabbed the handle and threw his full weight against it, muscles straining against twisted metal. On the third attempt, it shrieked open with a shower of safety glass. The officer was a woman, maybe 30, with olive skin and delicate features, now pale as the snow outside. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her breathing was shallow, labored. The nameplate on her uniform read Harper. "Officer Harper, can you hear me?" No response. Daniel pressed 2 fingers to her neck, pulse weak but steady. Her left leg was pinned beneath the crumpled dashboard, and when he shined his phone's flashlight on it, he saw the unnatural angle of a compound fracture. Shadow whined again, more urgently this time, and Daniel realized why. The officer's radio was crackling with static and garbled voices, but no one was responding to the dozens of unanswered calls that had been flooding the airwaves. Either her radio was damaged or... Daniel's blood chilled. In his experience, when cops didn't answer their radios, it usually meant they couldn't. And out here, that meant death. "We're getting you out of here," he murmured to the unconscious woman, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Working quickly, Daniel assessed the situation with the methodical precision the Army had drilled into him. The officer needed immediate medical attention, but the nearest hospital was 40 miles away through impassable roads. His house was only 2 miles if he could carry her that far. First, he had to free her leg. Daniel wedged himself into the passenger seat and braced his boots against the dashboard. The metal groaned in protest as he pushed with everything he had, his war-damaged shoulder screaming in agony. Shadow barked encouragement, his tail wagging despite the dire circumstances. "Come on, you piece of—" Daniel gritted his teeth and gave one final desperate shove. The dashboard shifted just enough. Officer Harper's leg came free with a sickening scrape of metal on bone. She moaned softly, the first sign of consciousness since he'd found her. "That's it, stay with me," Daniel said gently, lifting her from the driver's seat. She was smaller than she'd appeared in uniform, maybe 5'5" and 130 pounds, but unconscious weight was always heavier than it looked. As he cradled her against his chest, Daniel noticed something that made his stomach clench. The back window of the cruiser was blown out, not from the crash, but from the inside. And when he looked closer at the rear bumper, he could see where another vehicle had rammed it, the paint transfer still visible beneath a layer of fresh snow. This wasn't an accident. Someone had run Officer Harper off the road. Shadow growled low in his throat, his hackles rising as he stared into the darkness beyond the wreckage. In the distance, barely audible over the wind, came the sound Daniel had been dreading, another engine getting closer. "Time to go, boy." Daniel lifted Officer Harper and began the long trek home, each step a battle against the storm and the growing certainty that whoever had tried to kill this woman might still be out there hunting. The first mile was torture. Daniel's boots slipped constantly in the deep snow, and Officer Harper's dead weight threw off his balance with every step. His shoulder, damaged by shrapnel in Kandahar, felt like it was tearing apart, but he pushed through the pain. Shadow ranged ahead and behind a furry sentinel watching for threats. Halfway home, Officer Harper stirred. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Can't go back." "You're safe," Daniel said, adjusting his grip as he struggled through a particularly deep drift. "I'm taking you to my house. We'll get you patched up." Her eyes fluttered open, startling green even in the darkness. Who are you?" "Daniel Cross. I found you in the wreck. Your legs hurt pretty bad, but you're going to be okay." She tried to struggle, but her injuries made it impossible. "Put me down. I have to. They'll find me." "Lady, you're in the middle of a blizzard with a broken leg. The only place you're going is somewhere warm where I can stop that bleeding." "You don't understand." Her voice carried a desperation that made Daniel's instincts flare. "They tried to kill me. If they find me with you, then we'll deal with that when it happens." Shadow barked twice, his warning signal. Daniel dropped to one knee behind a snow-covered boulder. Officer Harper still in his arms. In the distance, headlights swept across the highway, moving slowly, searching. "They're looking for me," she whispered. The lights lingered near the crash site for several long minutes before moving on. Daniel waited another 10 minutes before continuing, taking a route through the trees that would keep them hidden from the road. By the time they reached his house, Daniel was running on pure stubbornness. The small log cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pines, smoke rising from the chimney like a beacon of warmth and safety. Golden light spilled from the windows, and Daniel had never been happier to see home. "Dad," Ethan's voice called from the porch as Daniel stumbled up the steps. His son appeared in the doorway, dark hair tousled, wearing his favorite Broncos pajamas. "Holy crap, what happened?" "Language," Daniel said automatically, though his heart wasn't in the correction. "Get the first aid kit from the bathroom cabinet. The big one." Ethan's eyes went wide as he took in the blood-covered police officer in his father's arms, but to his credit, he didn't panic. Living with a war veteran had taught him to handle emergencies with unusual composure for an 11-year-old. Daniel carried Officer Harper to the couch and laid her down gently. In the firelight, he could see the full extent of her injuries. The head wound was superficial, but her left leg was definitely broken, and she was showing signs of shock. "What's your first name, Officer Harper?" Daniel asked, as he began cutting away her pants leg with medical scissors. "Emily," she replied through gritted teeth. "Emily Harper." "Well, Emily, I'm going to set your leg and get you stabilized, but we need to get you to a hospital as soon as this storm passes." She shook her head weakly. "No hospitals. They'll be watching." Ethan returned with the first aid kit, his face pale but determined. "Dad, who's they?" "Good question." Daniel looked at Emily Harper, whose green eyes held secrets that went deeper than a car crash in a snowstorm. "You want to tell us what's really going on here?" Emily closed her eyes, and for a moment, Daniel thought she'd lost consciousness again. When she opened them, they were filled with a pain that had nothing to do with her injuries. "My husband was murdered 2 years ago," she said quietly. "He was a detective with the Denver PD. I've been working undercover to find out who killed him." Shadow, who had been lying quietly by the fire, suddenly lifted his head. He walked over to the couch and sniffed Emily's hand, his tail beginning a tentative wag. Emily's breath caught. "Trevor," the German shepherd whined and pressed his muzzle against her palm. "Shadow." Daniel frowned. "You know this dog?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He was my husband's K-9 partner, Trevor. Trevor was Detective Trevor Harper. Shadow was with him the night he died." The pieces began clicking into place in Daniel's mind. He'd gotten Shadow from a police auction 3 years ago, a retired K-9 who'd been through some kind of trauma. The dog had nightmares, refused to work with law enforcement, and had taken months to trust Daniel and Ethan. "The night Trevor died," Emily continued, her voice breaking, "Shadow was found 3 blocks away, covered in blood that wasn't his own. The official report said Trevor surprised some drug dealers, but I never believed it. Trevor was too smart, too careful." Shadow lay down next to the couch, resting his head on his paws, but keeping his eyes fixed on Emily. Daniel had never seen the dog so focused on a stranger. "So you became a cop to investigate your husband's murder?" "I transferred to Millbrook PD 6 months ago. Small department, easier to blend in. I've been building a case against Sheriff Rodriguez and his deputies. They're running drugs through the county using their badges as cover." Ethan, who had been listening with wide eyes, spoke up. "Are you saying the sheriff is a bad guy?" "I'm saying some people will do anything to protect their secrets," Emily replied, "including murder." Daniel finished splinting Emily's leg with materials from his well-stocked first aid kit. Military medic training never left you, and he'd seen enough field injuries to know how to stabilize a fracture. "There," he said, securing the last of the bandages. "That should hold until we can get you proper medical attention." "Thank you." Emily struggled to sit up. "But I need to contact the FBI. I have evidence hidden in my apartment, financial records, recordings, photographs. If Rodriguez realizes I'm still alive..." A sound from outside made them all freeze, the low rumble of engines approaching. Multiple vehicles. Shadow was on his feet instantly, a growl building in his chest. Daniel moved to the window and peered through the curtains. 4 sets of headlights were coming up his driveway, moving slowly through the snow. "Dad," Ethan's voice was small. "Get to your room," Daniel ordered. "Lock the door and don't come out no matter what you hear." "But now, Ethan." His son ran down the hallway, and Daniel heard the click of the bedroom lock. He turned to Emily, who was trying to struggle to her feet despite her injuries. "Stay down," he said, drawing his service pistol from its holster. "How many of them are there?" "Rodriguez, Deputy Morrison, Deputy Webb. Maybe others." Emily's face was white with pain and fear. "Daniel, if they find me here, they'll kill all of us. Not if I have anything to say about it." The engines stopped. Car doors slammed in the darkness outside, and Shadow's growling intensified. Through the window, Daniel could see flashlight beams playing across the snow, searching. A heavy fist pounded on the front door. "Daniel Cross," a voice shouted. "Sheriff Rodriguez, Millbrook County. Open up." Daniel looked at Emily, who had gone completely still. Shadow positioned himself between the couch and the door, his hackles raised, looking more like a wolf than a domestic dog. "What do I do?" Daniel whispered. "Don't let them in," Emily replied. "They have no warrant, no cause. But if they see me—" Another round of pounding. "Mr. Cross, we know you're in there. We're investigating a stolen police vehicle. We have reason to believe the suspect may be on your property." Daniel made a decision that would change all their lives forever. He moved to the door, but didn't open it, speaking through the heavy wood. "It's after midnight in a blizzard, Sheriff. Whatever you're looking for can wait until morning. This is police business, Mr. Cross. Step aside. This is private property. Come back with a warrant." Silence stretched for several seconds. Then Rodriguez's voice, again harder now. "We're coming in." Daniel heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun being racked. Behind him, Shadow's growling became a continuous, menacing rumble. Emily struggled to reach for something in her jacket, her service weapon. "No," Daniel said quietly. "If shooting starts, Ethan could get hurt. They'll kill us anyway." "Maybe. But I didn't survive 3 tours in Afghanistan to die in my own living room." The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. 4 men in sheriff's department uniforms stormed in, weapons drawn, their faces hidden behind tactical masks. But Daniel had already moved, using the couch as cover, while staying between the intruders and Emily. "Where is she?" Rodriguez demanded. He was a big man, probably 50, with the soft look of someone who'd spent more time behind a desk than on patrol. "We know Officer Harper survived the crash. Where is she? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with us, Cross." Deputy Morrison stepped forward, younger, leaner, with the twitchy energy of someone high on adrenaline or amphetamines. "We tracked blood in the snow right to your front door." Shadow chose that moment to make his presence known. The German Shepherd emerged from behind the couch with a snarl that raised the hair on the back of Daniel's neck. All 4 deputies swung their weapons toward the dog. "Call off your mutt," Rodriguez ordered. "He doesn't like uninvited guests." In the chaos of shouted orders and barking, Emily Harper made her move. Despite her broken leg, she rolled off the couch onto the floor, her service weapon in her hands. "Sheriff Marcus Rodriguez," she called out, her voice steady despite the pain. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, drug trafficking, and the murder of Detective Trevor Harper." The room went dead silent, except for the crackling of the fire and Shadow's continuous growling. Rodriguez laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emily Harper, I should have made sure you were dead the first time. You made a mistake leaving me alive. A mistake I'm about to correct." Rodriguez raised his shotgun, but Daniel was already moving. Military training took over muscle memory from a dozen firefights in the mountains of Afghanistan. He tackled the corrupt sheriff from the side, sending them both crashing into the coffee table. All hell broke loose. Morrison swung his rifle toward Daniel, but Shadow launched himself through the air with 40 pounds of furious German Shepherd muscle. The deputy went down screaming as Shadow's teeth found his gun arm. Emily, fighting through the agony of her broken leg, managed to get a clear shot at Deputy Webb. Her bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. The 4th deputy, Daniel didn't catch his name, was raising his pistol when Ethan's bedroom door flew open. "Get away from my dad!" the 11-year-old screamed, and something small and hard flew through the air. The deputy ducked instinctively as Ethan's baseball, his prized possession signed by Trevor Story, smacked him in the face. It wasn't much, but it was enough to throw off his aim. Daniel drove his elbow into Rodriguez's throat and rolled away as the sheriff's shotgun discharged into the ceiling, raining plaster down on everyone. He came up with his pistol drawn, but Rodriguez was faster than his bulk suggested. They grappled for control of the weapon, crashing into the fireplace screen and sending sparks flying across the hardwood floor. Rodriguez was strong, but Daniel had 20 years of military conditioning and the desperate fury of a father protecting his child. Meanwhile, Shadow had Morrison pinned to the ground, his jaws locked around the deputy's wrist, while the man screamed for help that wasn't coming. Webb was trying to reach his dropped weapon with his good arm, blood streaming from his shoulder. Emily, propped against the couch, kept her pistol trained on the wounded deputies while fighting to stay conscious. The adrenaline was wearing off, and shock was setting in. "Ethan, get back in your room!" Daniel shouted as he and Rodriguez crashed into the wall, family photos exploding in showers of glass. But his son ignored the order, grabbing a poker from the fireplace and swinging it at Webb, just as the deputy's fingers closed around his weapon. The metal bar connected with Webb's skull with a sickening crack, and the man collapsed. Rodriguez broke free from Daniel's grip and lunged for his fallen shotgun. Daniel dove after him, but the sheriff was closer. Rodriguez's finger found the trigger just as Shadow released Morrison and launched himself at the bigger threat. The shotgun boomed. Shadow yelped and tumbled to the ground, dark blood matting his fur. "Shadow!" Ethan screamed. The sound of his son's anguish unlocked something primal in Daniel Cross. With a roar that had nothing human in it, he fell on Rodriguez like an avenging angel. His fists found the sheriff's face again and again, years of war-bred violence channeled into protecting the family he'd found after so much loss. When Emily Harper finally managed to haul herself upright and press her service weapon to Rodriguez's temple, Daniel's knuckles were split and bleeding, and the corrupt sheriff's face was barely recognizable. "That's enough," she said quietly. Daniel rolled away, breathing hard. Morrison was unconscious, Shadow's attack having severed an artery in his arm. Webb wasn't moving, blood pooling beneath his head. The fourth deputy, Daniel, still didn't know his name, had fled sometime during the fighting. Ethan was kneeling beside Shadow, tears streaming down his face as he pressed his hands against the dog's side. "Dad, he's hurt really bad." Daniel crawled over to his son and his dog, his heart breaking at the sight of Shadow's labored breathing. The German shepherd's eyes were open, but Daniel could see the light fading. "Hey, boy," Daniel whispered, stroking Shadow's head. "You did good. You protected us." Shadow's tail gave one weak wag, and then he was still. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind outside and Ethan's quiet sobbing. Emily Harper, leaning heavily against the couch, looked around at the destruction of Daniel's living room. Overturned furniture, bullet holes in the walls, blood on the hardwood floors. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry I brought this into your home." Daniel looked up at her, this stranger who had crashed into their lives and changed everything. Shadow was dead. His son had witnessed violence no child should see. His home, their sanctuary, was a war zone. But they were alive. And sometimes, that was the only victory you got. "We're not done yet," Daniel said gently, lifting Shadow's body and carrying him to the couch. "You said you had evidence. What kind of evidence?" Emily Harper smiled for the first time since he'd pulled her from that wrecked police cruiser. It was a hard smile filled with pain and determination, and the promise of justice for a dead husband and a murdered dog. The kind that's going to bring down everyone who ever wore a badge in this county. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the small cabin, 3 survivors began planning the end of Marcus Rodriguez's empire of corruption. And in the morning, when the storm finally passed, Millbrook County would never be the same. The war veteran, the wounded cop, and the brave boy who'd lost his dog had found each other in the darkness. Now they were going to light up the world. Daniel carried Shadow's body to the back porch, his hands shaking as he wrapped the German shepherd in an old army blanket. The dog had saved their lives, and now he lay still and cold while the blizzard continued to rage outside. Ethan followed silently, his face streaked with tears that had already begun to freeze in the bitter air. "We'll bury him proper when the ground thaws," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "He was a good dog. A hero. The best," Ethan whispered, reaching out to touch Shadow's still form one last time. Inside, Emily Harper was struggling to stay conscious despite her injuries. The adrenaline from the firefight was wearing off, and the pain in her leg was becoming unbearable. Blood loss and shock were taking their toll, but she forced herself to focus. Rodriguez was unconscious, but breathing cable-tied with restraints Daniel had retrieved from his emergency supplies. Morrison had stopped bleeding but needed medical attention. Webb wasn't moving at all. "We need to secure this scene," Emily said as Daniel and Ethan returned to the destroyed living room. "And we need to move fast. That 4th deputy who ran, he'll be calling for backup." Daniel checked his watch. His bahasson. 3:15 in the morning. The storm was supposed to last until dawn, but that only gave them a few hours before more corrupt cops arrived. "Tell me about this evidence," Daniel said, kneeling beside Emily. "Is it enough to take down their whole operation?" Emily nodded weakly. Financial records showing payments from known drug dealers. Photos of Rodriguez meeting with cartel representatives. Audio recordings of them planning my husband's murder. Her voice broke on the last words. Trevor recorded everything on his phone the night they killed him. I found it hidden in his locker months later. Where is it now? Safe deposit box at First National Bank in Denver. Only I can access it. She tried to shift position and gasped as pain shot through her leg. But there are copies hidden in my apartment. Insurance in case something happened to me. Something did happen to you, Ethan pointed out with the brutal honesty only children possessed. Emily managed a weak smile. Smart kid. Yeah, they tried to kill me tonight. Ran me off the road after I got too close to their distribution center. Daniel stood and began pacing his military mind, working through their options. We can't call local law enforcement, they're all compromised. State police won't make it through this storm. FBI is hours away even in good weather. There's someone, Emily said. Agent Sarah Chen with the Denver FBI field office. She's been working the cartel angle from the federal side. If we can reach her. How do we know she's not compromised, too? Because she was Trevor's contact when he first started investigating the corruption. She's the one who suggested I go undercover in Millbrook. Emily pulled a blood-stained phone from her jacket. I have her direct number. Daniel looked at the device, its screen cracked but still functional. Make the call. Emily dialed with trembling fingers while Daniel checked on their prisoners. Rodriguez was stirring blood crusted around his nose and mouth. Morrison was pale but stable. Webb still hadn't moved, and Daniel was beginning to think the deputy might not wake up at all. Agent Chen. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. It's Emily Harper. No, I'm not safe. They tried to kill me tonight. Rodriguez, Morrison, at least 2 others. Yes, I have the evidence. No, listen to me, I'm trapped in a blizzard with a civilian family. The entire Millbrook Sheriff's Department is compromised. Daniel could hear the FBI agent's voice through the phone, urgent and professional. Emily gave their location and a brief summary of the night's events, her words becoming more slurred as exhaustion and blood loss took their toll. "She's sending a helicopter as soon as the weather breaks," Emily said, ending the call. "But that could be hours." "Then we wait," Daniel replied. "And we stay ready." Ethan had been quietly cleaning up the broken glass and overturned furniture, moving with the mechanical precision of someone trying to process trauma through action. Now he looked up at his father with eyes that seemed years older than they had been that morning. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" Daniel knelt beside his son, pulling him into a fierce hug. "We're alive and we're together. That's what matters." "But Shadow died protecting us. That's what good soldiers do. They sacrifice themselves for their unit. And we're his unit, Ethan. We always were." Rodriguez chose that moment to regain consciousness, groaning as he tried to sit up against his restraints. His eyes focused on Emily with pure hatred. "You stupid bitch," he slurred through swollen lips. "You have no idea what you've done." "I've exposed you for what you are," Emily replied, her voice stronger than Daniel had heard it all night. "A corrupt piece of garbage who murders cops and deals drugs." Rodriguez laughed, spitting blood onto Daniel's hardwood floor. "You think this is about drugs? This is about survival, little girl. The cartels don't give you choices, you work with them or you die. I kept this county safe by making a deal with devils." "You kept yourself rich," Emily shot back. "Trevor found the financial records. $2 million in offshore accounts, Rodriguez. That's not survival money, that's retirement money. Your husband was a self-righteous fool who would have gotten us all killed. The Valenzuela cartel doesn't negotiate. They don't compromise. They gave us a simple choice: take their money and look the other way, or watch our families die in their sleep." Daniel felt his anger rising again. "So you murdered a good cop to protect your arrangement." "I protected my community," Rodriguez roared, straining against his bonds. "You have no idea what these people are capable of. They skinned a DEA agent alive in Juarez last month, left his head on his wife's doorstep, with a note saying her children were next. And now they know Emily's alive." Daniel said, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. "They know she has evidence that could expose their operation." Rodriguez's bloody smile was answer enough. Emily struggled to reach her phone again. "I need to call Agent Chen back. If the cartel knows..." Before she could dial, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the storm. But these engines had a different note, higher pitched, moving faster despite the snow. "That's not Sheriff's Department," Daniel said, moving to the window. Through the blizzard, he could see multiple sets of headlights approaching from the main road. But these vehicles were black SUVs, not police cruisers. "Cartel," Emily whispered. "They must have been monitoring police frequencies." Daniel's blood turned to ice. He'd fought Taliban fighters and Al-Qaeda terrorists, but the cartels were different. They were businessmen who used violence as a tool, and they had no rules about civilians or children. "Ethan, get to the basement," Daniel ordered. "There's a hidden room behind the water heater. Remember when I showed you?" "Dad, I'm not leaving you." "This isn't a discussion, son. Go. Now." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his father's voice stopped him. He ran toward the basement stairs, disappearing into the darkness below. Daniel turned to Emily. "Can you handle a weapon with that leg?" "Try me." He retrieved a hunting rifle from his gun safe and laid it across her lap, along with 2 boxes of ammunition. 30-06. Enough stopping power to punch through engine blocks. "What about you?" Daniel checked his service pistol and grabbed a tactical shotgun from the safe. "I'll take the front. You cover the back door. If they get past me, they won't." The SUVs stopped just outside the circle of light from Daniel's porch. Car doors slammed, and Daniel could hear voices speaking in rapid Spanish. He counted at least 6 men, maybe more. Rodriguez was laughing again, the sound like broken glass in the silence. "You're all dead. Miguel Valenzuela doesn't leave witnesses." A voice called out from the darkness, heavily accented but clear. "Daniel Cross, we know you are inside. Send out the woman, and we will let you live." Daniel pressed himself against the wall beside the shattered front door. "Counteroffer. Get off my property before I start shooting." Laughter from multiple throats. "You are outnumbered, senor. We have no quarrel with you, but the woman has something that belongs to us. Evidence of your drug operation doesn't belong to you. Everything in this county belongs to us. The sheriff, the deputies, even the judges. Did you think this was some small-time corruption? We own Millbrook County, Mr. Cross. We own everyone in it." Emily called out from her position near the back door. "Daniel, there are more coming around behind the house. At least 3 men." Daniel's mind raced through tactical options. The cabin was defensible but not impregnable. Against 6 or 7 armed cartel soldiers, their chances were slim. But he'd been in worse situations in Afghanistan, and he'd had less to fight for. "What do you want with her?" Daniel shouted back. "The woman has recordings, photographs, evidence that could damage our business relationships. We want those materials returned. And then you'll let us go." More laughter. "Of course, senor. We are businessmen, not monsters." Daniel caught Emily's eye and shook his head. They both knew the cartel was lying. Dead men tell no tales, and they'd all seen too much to be allowed to live. Glass shattered at the back of the house as someone broke the kitchen window. Emily swung her rifle toward the sound, bracing herself against the couch, despite the agony in her leg. "Contact rear," she called out. The rifle boomed and someone screamed in Spanish. Emily worked the bolt and fired again, the heavy bullets punching through the kitchen wall like it was made of paper. At the front of the house, Daniel heard the distinctive whistle of incoming fire and dove for cover as automatic weapons opened up. The picture window exploded in a shower of glass and wood splinters, and bullets chewed up the walls where he'd been standing moments before. He rolled behind the overturned coffee table and returned fire with the shotgun, the heavy loads designed for hunting elk, devastating at close range. One of the cartel soldiers who'd tried to rush the front door went down hard, his assault rifle spinning away into the snow. "How many rounds do you have?" Emily called out between shots. "Enough," Daniel replied, though he was already doing the math in his head. His ammunition wouldn't last forever, and the cartel soldiers seemed to have no shortage of firepower. A new sound cut through the gunfire, the distinctive whop, whop, whop of helicopter rotors fighting through the storm. Daniel risked a glance through the shattered window and saw searchlights cutting through the blizzard approaching fast. "FBI," a voice boomed through an external speaker. "This is Agent Chen with federal law enforcement. Cease fire immediately and throw down your weapons." The cartel soldiers responded with a withering barrage of automatic fire directed at the helicopter. Daniel heard the aircraft pulling back its searchlights, sweeping across the battle zone, but unable to get close enough to intervene. Rodriguez was screaming something in Spanish, probably orders to his cartel contacts. Emily swung her rifle toward him. "Shut up, or I'll shut you up permanently." The corrupt sheriff's response was cut short by the sound of boots on the front porch. Daniel waited until he saw movement in the doorway before triggering both barrels of the shotgun. The blast sent 2 cartel soldiers tumbling back into the snow, but more were coming. From the kitchen, Emily's rifle cracked repeatedly as she held off the attack from the rear. But Daniel could hear the stress in her voice, the pain and exhaustion taking their toll. "I'm running low back here." Daniel threw her another box of ammunition, the cardboard sliding across the blood-slicked floor. Make every shot count. A voice from outside, different from before, older and more authoritative. Enough, we take them alive. The gunfire stopped abruptly, leaving only the wind and the distant sound of the FBI helicopter circling, waiting for an opening. "Mr. Cross," the voice called out. "My name is Miguel Valenzuela. Perhaps you have heard of me." Daniel had indeed heard of Miguel Valenzuela. The man was a legend in law enforcement circles, the head of one of Mexico's most powerful cartels. If he was here personally, this was bigger than simple corruption in a small Colorado county. "I'm listening," Daniel called back. "I am a reasonable man, Mr. Cross. A businessman. The woman has something I need, and I am prepared to compensate you handsomely for your cooperation." "What kind of compensation?" $1 million. Cash. Enough to give your son a very comfortable life. Daniel felt Emily's eyes on him from across the room. For just a moment he considered it. Ethan's college fund was small, and $1 million would solve a lot of problems. But then he looked at the bloodstains on his floor, at the hole in the wall where Shadow had made his last stand at Emily Harper, fighting to stay conscious while defending his home. "Counter-offer," Daniel shouted back. "You and your men leave now, and I won't tell the FBI which direction you went." Valenzuela's laughter was different from his soldiers' cultured, almost refined. "You disappoint me, Mr. Cross. I had hoped you would be more reasonable." "I've never been accused of being reasonable." "Very well. We do this the hard way." The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Cartel soldiers rushed the front door, while others poured through the kitchen window, and a 3rd team tried to breach the back door. Daniel and Emily found themselves in the center of a deadly crossfire, outnumbered and outgunned. Daniel's shotgun roared again and again, each blast dropping an attacker, but bringing others closer. Emily's rifle had become a sniper weapon, her shots precise and deadly despite her injuries. But there were too many of them. A cartel soldier made it through the kitchen, his submachine gun chattering as he sprayed bullets across the living room. Daniel dove for cover, but the gunman was already swinging toward Emily. The shot that dropped the cartel soldier came from an unexpected direction, the basement stairs. Ethan Cross emerged from the darkness, Daniel's backup pistol smoking in his small hands. "I told you to stay hidden," Daniel roared. "You needed help." Before Daniel could respond, Miguel Valenzuela himself appeared in the shattered doorway. He was smaller than Daniel had expected, maybe 60 years old, wearing an expensive suit under a tactical vest. His silver hair was perfectly styled, despite the blizzard, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd killed more people than he could remember. "Enough," Valenzuela commanded, and his remaining soldiers stopped firing. "This has gone too far." Daniel kept his shotgun trained on the cartel leader while Emily covered the kitchen with her rifle. Ethan had taken cover behind the stairs, his pistol held in a proper 2-handed grip that made Daniel simultaneously proud and terrified. "You've lost half your men," Daniel pointed out. "Maybe it's time to cut your losses." "Perhaps," Valenzuela agreed. "But I cannot leave without what I came for. The woman has recordings that could destroy my business relationships with certain American officials. I'm sure you understand. Those officials are corrupt cops and politicians. The world would be better off without them." Valenzuela shrugged. "Corruption is simply another form of business, Mr. Cross. Supply and demand. Your countrymen demand drugs, we supply them. Your officials demand money, we supply that too. It is the American way, no." Emily struggled to sit up straighter, her rifle still aimed at the cartel leader. "You murdered my husband for trying to stop you. Your husband was attempting to disrupt a carefully balanced ecosystem, Senora. Sometimes the gardener must prune the roses to keep them blooming. The hatred in Emily's eyes was like a physical force. Trevor was a good man, a good cop. I'm sure he was. But good men often die young in my business. Valenzuela looked around the destroyed living room, taking in the blood and bodies with professional interest. You have fought well, all of you, but this ends now. Outside, Daniel could hear the FBI helicopter getting closer despite the storm. Agent Chen was pushing the limits of what was safe in these conditions, but she was running out of time. The FBI is here, Daniel said. Even if you kill us, you won't escape. Valenzuela smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Daniel had ever seen. The FBI cannot prove I was ever here, Mr. Cross. My men and I will disappear into the storm, and by morning this will simply be another tragedy. A police officer killed in the line of duty, a war veteran, and his son caught in the crossfire. They'll find your fingerprints, DNA evidence. Will they? Yet I have friends in very high places, Mr. Cross. Friends who can make evidence disappear, who can alter crime scenes, who can ensure that inconvenient investigations reach the wrong conclusions. Daniel felt his heart sink as he realized the scope of the corruption they were facing. This wasn't just about Millbrook County, it was about a network of compromised officials that reached into federal agencies. However, Valenzuela continued, I am still a businessman. I will make you one final offer. He reached into his jacket, moving slowly to avoid triggering a defensive reaction. Instead of a weapon, he withdrew a thick envelope. $2 million, Mr. Cross. Cash. Enough to disappear to start a new life somewhere far from here. All you have to do is walk away and forget this night ever happened. Daniel looked at the money, more cash than he'd ever seen in one place. It would be enough to give Ethan everything, the best schools, college without debt, a future free from the financial struggles that had defined Daniel's own life. But then he looked at Emily Harper, wounded and bleeding, but still fighting for justice for her murdered husband. He thought about Shadow, who died protecting their family. He thought about Trevor Harper, a good cop killed for doing his job. Keep your money, Daniel said. Valenzuela's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You are making a very poor decision, Mr. Cross. I've made worse ones and lived to regret them. Not this time. The cartel leader raised his hand, and his remaining soldiers tensed. But before anyone could move, the night exploded with new gunfire from outside. Federal agents were rappelling from the FBI helicopter, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness as they engaged Valenzuela's perimeter guards. FBI federal agents! The shouts came from multiple directions as Agent Chen's team moved to surround the cabin. Valenzuela cursed in Spanish and pulled a pistol from his jacket. If I cannot have the evidence, then no one can. He swung the weapon toward Emily, but Daniel was already moving. The shotgun blast caught the cartel leader's center mass, hurling him backward through the shattered doorway. Miguel Valenzuela, the most powerful drug lord in Mexico, died in a puddle of melting snow on a war veteran's front porch. The remaining cartel soldiers tried to fight their way out, but they were caught between Daniel's defensive position and the advancing FBI agents. The gunfight was brief and decisive. When the silence finally fell, Daniel found himself sitting on his destroyed couch holding Ethan, while Emily Harper leaned against his shoulder. All three of them were covered in blood, some their own, some belonging to their enemies. Agent Sarah Chen burst through the front door, her tactical gear making her look like something from a video game. She was Asian American, maybe 40, with the lean build of someone who spent more time in the field than behind a desk. Jesus Christ, she breathed, taking in the carnage. Emily. Emily, are you all right? Been better, Emily replied weakly. But I'm alive. We all are. Chen knelt beside them, her medic training taking over as she assessed Emily's injuries. "We need to get you to a hospital. All of you." "The evidence," Emily said, gripping Chen's arm. "It's all there. Financial records, recordings, photographs. Everything you need to clean out the corruption in this county." "We'll get it," Chen assured her. "But first, let's get you medical attention." As FBI medics worked to stabilize Emily and check Daniel and Ethan for injuries, Chen pulled Daniel aside. "You saved her life," the agent said. "Emily's been working this case for 2 years, risking everything to get justice for her husband. If you hadn't found her, she saved ours too," Daniel replied, looking down at Rodriguez's unconscious form. "This whole county was rotten from the top down. We've suspected for months, but we needed someone on the inside. Emily volunteered even though she knew how dangerous it would be." Daniel watched as the medics loaded Emily onto a stretcher, her green eyes fighting to stay open, despite the pain medication they'd given her. She caught his gaze and mouthed, "Thank you," before the medics carried her outside to the waiting medical helicopter. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice small and tired. Agent Chen knelt down to his level. "Now we clean house, kiddo. Your dad and Emily gave us everything we need to arrest every corrupt official in the county. It's going to be a long process, but justice will be served." "What about the people who killed Shadow?" Chen looked confused until Daniel explained about the German shepherd's sacrifice. Her expression softened with understanding. "Shadow was a police dog, wasn't he Detective Harper's partner?" "Trevor Harper was Emily's husband," Daniel confirmed. "Then Shadow died in the line of duty just like his partner. There are honors for that ceremonies. Would you like us to arrange something?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "He was a good dog. He saved us." As dawn broke over Millbrook County, the storm finally began to clear. Federal agents were securing the scene, documenting evidence, and beginning the massive investigation that would eventually bring down the entire corruption network. Rodriguez and Morrison were taken into custody, though Morrison might not survive his injuries. Webb was pronounced dead at the scene. Daniel stood on his front porch, looking out at the brightening sky. His home was destroyed, his dog was dead, and his son had been forced to kill a man to protect their family. But they were alive, and sometimes that was the only victory that mattered. Agent Chen joined him on the porch, steam rising from the coffee cup in her hands. "Emily's going to recover," she said. "Clean break in her leg, some blood loss, but she's tough. Will she be okay? I mean, after everything that's happened? She's got the closure she's been looking for. Trevor's killers are dead or in custody, and the evidence she gathered will put away dozens of corrupt officials. That's worth something." Daniel nodded, thinking about the long road ahead. There would be trials, testimony, media attention. His quiet life in the mountains was over, replaced by something more complicated, but perhaps more meaningful. "What about us? Are we safe?" "The Valenzuela cartel is finished," Chen assured him. "Miguel was their leader, and with him dead and their American contacts exposed, they won't be able to operate in this region anymore." "And Emily? She's been offered a position with the Bureau. I think she'll take it after she recovers." As if summoned by their conversation, Emily Harper appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on crutches, but insisting on walking under her own power. The medics had cleaned and bandaged her head wound, and her broken leg was properly splinted, but her green eyes were clear and determined. "Couldn't sleep," she said by way of explanation. "Too much caffeine in that IV." "You should be resting," Daniel said. "I'll rest when this is over." She looked around at the FBI agents processing the scene. "How long before they're done here?" "Could be days," Chen replied. "This is a complex crime scene with multiple agencies involved." Emily nodded, then turned to Daniel and Ethan. I want you to know how sorry I am that this happened to you. You saved my life and I brought death to your door." "You brought justice," Daniel corrected. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Ethan looked up at Emily with the serious expression that had become his default since Shadow's death. "Are you really going to work for the FBI?" "Thinking about it." "Why?" "Because if you do, you should come visit us sometimes. Dad gets lonely, and I think Shadow would have liked you to stay in touch." Emily smiled for the first time since Daniel had pulled her from that wrecked police cruiser. It transformed her face, making her look younger and more hopeful than she had any right to after everything she'd been through. "I'd like that very much, Ethan." As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds, Daniel Cross realized that some endings were really beginnings in disguise. His quiet life was over, but something new was starting, something that might be worth the price they'd all paid to reach it. The war veteran, the wounded cop, and the brave boy who'd lost his dog had found each other in the darkness and fought their way to dawn. Now they would face whatever came next, together bound by shared trauma and mutual respect into something that might, given time, become a family. The morning sun streaming through the shattered windows couldn't warm the chill that had settled deep in Daniel's bones. 3 weeks had passed since that night, and the media circus showed no signs of dying down. News vans lined his driveway like mechanical vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky, as reporters clamored for exclusive interviews with the hero of Millbrook County. Daniel ignored them all, just as he'd ignored the book deals, movie offers, and speaking engagements that poured in daily. Fame was the last thing he wanted, especially when it came at the cost of his privacy and Ethan's childhood innocence. "Dad, there's another reporter at the back door," Ethan called from the kitchen where he was eating cereal that had gone soggy while he stared out the window. The 11-year-old had aged years. In the past few weeks, his easy smile replaced by a wariness that broke Daniel's heart. "Tell them the same thing we tell all of them," Daniel replied without looking up from the insurance paperwork spread across his damaged coffee table. No comment. The house was slowly being repaired, but the bullet holes and bloodstains had become permanent residents in Daniel's memory. Every creak of the floorboards reminded him of that night. Every shadow in his peripheral vision made him reach for a weapon that wasn't there. Emily had been discharged from the hospital after a week, her leg healing faster than the doctors had predicted. She'd been staying at a FBI safe house in Denver while the investigation continued, but her daily phone calls had become the highlight of Daniel's routine. Somehow, talking to the woman who'd survived that nightmare with them made the whole experience feel less surreal. The phone rang, and Daniel answered without checking the caller ID, hoping it was Emily, but expecting another journalist or federal prosecutor. "Daniel." Emily's voice carried a tension he hadn't heard since that night. "We need to talk. Are you somewhere secure?" Daniel glanced around his living room where FBI technicians had installed a sophisticated security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. "As secure as it gets. What's wrong?" "Agent Chen just briefed me on something that changes everything. The investigation into the corruption network has revealed connections we never suspected. This thing goes deeper than Millbrook County, deeper than Colorado." "How deep?" "Federal judges, DEA administrators, even someone in the Justice Department. The Valenzuela cartel had contacts all the way up the chain, Daniel. And now that Miguel is dead and Rodriguez is talking..." Daniel felt his blood chill. "They're coming after us again. Not the cartel. They're finished. But the American officials who were taking their money, they have everything to lose if this goes to trial. And there are 3 witnesses who can tie them directly to the conspiracy. Us. Rodriguez finally broke yesterday. Started naming names in exchange for a plea deal. Turns out Sheriff Marcus Rodriguez was small potatoes compared to some of the people on his payroll. Daniel looked at Ethan, who was pretending to read a comic book while obviously listening to every word. His son had already lost too much innocence. The thought of putting him in danger again made Daniel's hands shake with suppressed rage. "What are you saying, Emily?" "I'm saying that federal judge William Harrison, who's been taking cartel money for 5 years, just learned that his name is on recordings Trevor made before he died. I'm saying that DEA Deputy Director Robert Walsh has been feeding operation details to the cartels in exchange for offshore accounts. I'm saying these people will kill to protect their secrets." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders. "So what do we do? Agent Chen wants to put you and Ethan in witness protection until the trials are over. New identities, new location, the whole program." "For how long?" Emily's silence was answer enough. When corruption reached the highest levels of law enforcement, trials could take years. Appeals could take longer. And even after convictions, there would always be someone looking for revenge. "I can't do that to Ethan," Daniel said quietly. "This is his home, his school, his friends, his whole life. His life won't matter if Harrison or Walsh decide he's a liability." Through the kitchen window, Daniel could see more news vans arriving. The media attention that had seemed like an annoyance was about to become a deadly spotlight, broadcasting their location to anyone who wanted to find them. "There's something else," Emily continued. "Something Chen didn't want to tell you over the phone." "What now?" "Rodriguez gave up the location of Trevor's original evidence cache. Turns out my husband was even more thorough than I knew. He had backup files hidden in a safety deposit box in Grand Junction financial records going back 7 years. The corruption network includes over 40 officials across 6 states. Daniel felt a sick fascination despite his fear. 40 officials, judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, DEA agents, even a few FBI personnel. The Valenzuela cartel essentially bought themselves their own justice system. And now they're all exposed. Which makes us the 3 most dangerous people in America to a lot of very powerful individuals. Ethan had given up pretending to read and was now openly staring at his father, his young face pale with understanding. The boy was smart enough to realize that their nightmare was far from over. "Dad," Ethan's voice was small, "are we going to have to run away?" Daniel looked at his son, this brave kid who'd killed a man to protect their family, who'd watched his dog die, defending strangers, who'd had his childhood shattered by adult corruption and violence. The thought of uprooting him again, of forcing him to abandon everything familiar, felt like another form of child abuse. "We'll figure it out, buddy." But even as Daniel said the words, he knew their options were limited. Stay and risk assassination by corrupt federal officials, or disappear into witness protection and lose everything that made life worth living. "I'm coming up there," Emily said suddenly. Agent Chen cleared it. "We need to discuss this in person." "Is that safe?" "Nowhere is safe anymore, Daniel. But together we at least have a chance." 2 hours later, Emily Harper climbed out of an unmarked FBI vehicle, her movements still careful due to her healing leg, but her eyes sharp and alert. She was accompanied by Agent Chen and 2 other federal agents. Daniel didn't recognize their presence, a reminder that the investigation had grown far beyond Millbrook County. The media feeding frenzy intensified as reporters recognized Emily from the dozens of news stories about the corruption conspiracy. Cameras flashed and questions were shouted as the FBI agents formed a protective corridor to escort her into the house. "Emily," a reporter called out, "is it true that Judge Harrison offered you money to change your testimony?" "Officer Harper, can you confirm reports that the Justice Department is covering up federal involvement in the cartel conspiracy?" Emily kept her head down and her mouth shut until she was safely inside Daniel's war-torn living room. Only then did she allow herself to relax, accepting the cup of coffee Ethan offered with a grateful smile. "You've grown," she told the boy. "Taller. 3/4 of an inch since you left." Ethan replied with the first real smile Daniel had seen from him in weeks. "Dad measured me yesterday." Agent Chen was all business, spreading files across Daniel's repaired coffee table like a battlefield commander planning an assault. "We've identified 17 separate threats against the three of you in the past week alone. Phone calls, emails, letters. Most are from conspiracy theorists and cranks, but at least 3 appear to be from professional sources." "Professional sources," Daniel repeated. "You mean assassins?" "We mean individuals with the skills and resources to carry out sophisticated operations against protected witnesses." "Stop dancing around it, Chen," Emily said bluntly. "Someone put a price on our heads." The FBI agent nodded reluctantly. "Multiple someones, actually. We've intercepted communications suggesting that several of the exposed officials have pooled resources to eliminate the primary witnesses." "How much?" Ethan asked with the morbid curiosity of an 11-year-old. "Ethan," Daniel warned. "It's okay," Chen said. "He deserves to know what he's facing. $5 million for all 3 of you. $10 million if they can recover and destroy Trevor Harper's evidence files." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Daniel had seen what professional killers could do for a fraction of that amount during his tours overseas. With $15 million at stake, they'd be facing the best assassins money could buy. "So witness protection," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "It's the only way to guarantee your safety," Chen replied. "New identities, complete relocation, federal protection, until the trials are concluded." "And after the trials?" Chen's hesitation was telling. "That depends on the outcomes. If we secure convictions, they'll appeal," Emily interrupted. "Corrupt federal judges don't go quietly into prison. This could drag on for decades, which is why the Marshal Service recommends permanent relocation with new identities." Daniel looked around his living room, taking in the family photos that had survived the gunfight, the handmade furniture he'd built during his recovery from war wounds, the small details that made this house a home. The thought of walking away from it all, of forcing Ethan to abandon his entire life, felt like surrender. "There has to be another option." "There is," Emily said quietly. "We could go public. Full media exposure, tell our story to every news outlet in the country. Make ourselves too visible to kill quietly." Chen shook her head. "That's essentially painting targets on your backs. The kind of people we're dealing with don't care about public attention. They'll kill you and frame it as cartel retaliation or domestic terrorism." "What about protective custody?" Daniel asked. "Keep us safe until the trials, then let us go back to our lives." "Protective custody for potentially years with a child." Chen looked at Ethan with obvious sympathy. "That's not much different from prison, just with better guards." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the repaired windows, Daniel could see the media crowd parting as a black sedan pulled up to the house. 2 men in expensive suits climbed out their movements, carrying the confidence of people accustomed to getting their way. "FBI?" Daniel asked. Chen was already moving toward the window, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. "No, I don't recognize them." The lead man was tall and silver-haired, maybe 60, with the kind of bearing that suggested military background or high-level government service. His companion was younger, darker, with the lean build of someone who stayed in fighting shape long after leaving the service. They walked through the media crowd like it didn't exist, ignoring questions and cameras with the practice of people accustomed to operating in shadows. When they reached Daniel's front door, the older man knocked with the measured rhythm of someone making an official call. "Mr. Cross, my name is Director James Morrison, Department of Justice. I'd like a word with you and Officer Harper." Chen's expression went cold. Morrison isn't on the case list. He shouldn't even know this location. "Stay here," Daniel told Ethan, then moved to the door with Emily and Chen flanking him. The FBI agent's hand was now openly resting on her weapon, ready for trouble. Daniel opened the door, but didn't invite the men inside. "What can I do for you, Director Morrison?" "We need to discuss your testimony in the upcoming trials. There are complications that have arisen." "What kind of complications?" Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The kind that could be resolved with a reasonable conversation between reasonable people. "May we come in?" "I don't think that's appropriate," Chen interjected. "Mr. Cross and Officer Harper are under federal protection. Any contact with Justice Department officials should go through proper channels." "Agent Chen, isn't it?" Morrison's companion spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent Daniel couldn't place. "I believe you'll find that our credentials supersede your authority in this matter." The man produced a leather folder containing official identification, but he held it at an angle that prevented Daniel from reading the details. Chen examined it, and Daniel saw her face go pale. "Sir, I need to verify these credentials with my supervisor." "By all means," Morrison said agreeably. "But I think you'll find everything is in order. We're here to offer Mr. Cross and Officer Harper an alternative to witness protection." "What kind of alternative?" Emily asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "A private arrangement that would ensure your safety while allowing you to maintain your current lives. No relocation, no new identities, no years in hiding." "In exchange for what?" Daniel's military instincts were screaming warnings. Offers that sounded too good to be true usually were. Modified testimony, certain details that might implicate, shall we say, overzealous federal agents who were conducting unauthorized operations. "You want us to lie," Emily said flatly. "I want you to be very careful about distinguishing between facts and assumptions," Morrison replied smoothly. "There's a difference between what you know and what you think you know." Chen had finished her phone call and returned looking shaken. "Sir, my supervisor confirms your credentials, but he also says this meeting is highly irregular." "Irregular times call for irregular measures, Agent Chen. The conspiracy you've uncovered has tentacles reaching into the highest levels of government. Some of those tentacles were actually authorized operations designed to infiltrate and dismantle the cartel network." Daniel felt Emily tense beside him. Trevor's murder was an authorized operation. Detective Harper stumbled into an ongoing federal investigation. His death was an unfortunate consequence of maintaining operational security. He was tortured and executed by corrupt cops. Emily's voice rose with fury. "Are you telling me that was sanctioned by the Justice Department?" Morrison's expression remained impassive. "I'm telling you that the full truth is more complex than you realize. Some of the officials you believe to be corrupt were actually working under federal authority to gather intelligence on cartel operations." "That's bullshit," Daniel said bluntly. "We have recordings, financial records, photographic evidence of corruption." "You have evidence of money changing hands," Morrison corrected. "What you don't have is context. Some of those transactions were part of authorized undercover operations." Chen was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Sir, with respect, this should be handled through proper Justice Department channels. Mr. Cross and Officer Harper have rights." "They have rights," Morrison agreed, "including the right to avoid spending the next 10 years in witness protection, while their testimony destroys the careers of federal agents who were trying to do their jobs." The younger man stepped forward, his movement casual but somehow threatening. "Mr. Cross, you're a veteran. You understand operational security. Sometimes good people have to do bad things to accomplish good missions." "I understand when I'm being threatened," Daniel replied, his own military bearing coming to the fore. "And right now, that's exactly what this feels like." Morrison sighed as if disappointed by Daniel's lack of cooperation. "Mr. Cross, I'm trying to offer you a way out of this mess. Your testimony as currently planned will expose operations that have taken years to develop. Agents who've risked their lives to infiltrate the cartels will be blown. Ongoing investigations into other criminal organizations will be compromised." "Maybe those operations should be exposed," Emily said. "Maybe agents who murder cops and take cartel money deserve to be blown." "And maybe you're not seeing the bigger picture," Morrison's companion replied. "The Valenzuela cartel was just one tentacle of a larger organization. By destroying our inside access, you're essentially guaranteeing that other cartels will fill the vacuum." "With you getting a cut of the profits?" Daniel asked. Morrison's mask of diplomatic courtesy finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Mr. Cross, I'm going to give you some free advice. There are forces at work here that you don't understand, consequences to your actions that go far beyond your personal desire for justice." Sounds like a threat. "It's a warning. The people you think you're helping by testifying have enemies you can't imagine. By exposing federal operations, you're not just hurting corrupt officials, you're compromising national security." Chen stepped forward, her federal authority finally asserting itself. "Gentlemen, I think this conversation is over. Mr. Cross and Officer Harper are protected witnesses, and any further contact needs to go through proper channels." Morrison looked at Chen with the expression of someone swatting an annoying insect. "Agent Chen, you're operating under the assumption that your authority matters in this situation. I can assure you it doesn't. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Of course." Morrison straightened his expensive suit jacket. "Mr. Cross Officer Harper, I hope you'll consider what we've discussed. The offer of private protection stands, but it won't remain open indefinitely." The two men walked back through the media crowd as confidently as they'd arrived, leaving Daniel, Emily, and Chen standing in the doorway with more questions than answers. "Who the hell were they really?" Emily asked as soon as the sedan disappeared down the mountain road. Chen was already on her phone again, her voice urgent as she spoke to her supervisor. The conversation lasted several minutes, during which Daniel watched Emily pace his living room like a caged animal, her healing leg barely slowing her down. "My supervisor says Morrison is real," Chen finally reported. "Deputy Director of the Justice Department's Criminal Division. But he also says Morrison has no official reason to be involved in this case." "Unofficial reasons?" Daniel asked. "That's what worries me. If the Justice Department is sending unauthorized personnel to pressure witnesses, then the corruption goes even higher than we thought," Emily finished. From the kitchen, Ethan called out, "Dad, there's someone else here." Daniel looked out the window to see another government vehicle pulling up, this one bearing FBI markings. Agent Sarah Chen's supervisor, Director Frank Walsh, climbed out, along with two agents Daniel didn't recognize. "This is getting ridiculous," Emily muttered. "How many federal agencies are going to show up at your door today?" Director Walsh was a contrast to Morrison, shorter, heavier, with the rumpled appearance of someone who spent more time in the field than behind a desk. His handshake was firm, his eyes direct, and Daniel found himself trusting the man, despite his wariness of federal officials. "Mr. Cross Officer Harper, Agent Chen, we need to talk about what just happened here." They gathered again around Daniel's coffee table, the federal agents outnumbering the civilians, but somehow managing not to make it feel like an interrogation. "Morrison isn't authorized to be here," Walsh began without preamble. His presence suggests that someone in justice is very nervous about your testimony. He tried to convince us that some of the corruption was actually authorized federal operations, Emily said. Walsh grimaced. There's a grain of truth to that which makes it more dangerous. Yes, we've had agents working undercover to infiltrate cartel operations, but the corruption you've uncovered goes far beyond any authorized activity. How can you be sure? Daniel asked. Because I've been running the authorized operations, and none of them involved Sheriff Rodriguez or the officials you've identified. What Morrison is trying to do is muddy the waters, make you question what you know. Why? Because your testimony threatens to expose corruption that reaches into the Justice Department itself. People Morrison works with may be Morrison himself. The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. If the Justice Department was compromised, if the very people responsible for prosecuting corruption were themselves corrupt, then there was nowhere safe to turn. So what do we do? He asked. Walsh leaned forward, his expression grim. We accelerate the timeline. Get your testimony on record as quickly as possible before the corrupted elements can interfere. And then we hope the clean elements of the federal government are stronger than the dirty ones. Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not exactly inspiring confidence, Director Walsh. I'm not going to lie to you, Officer Harper. This is the biggest corruption case in federal law enforcement history. We're talking about a network that infiltrated multiple agencies over more than a decade. There are going to be people with the power to make you disappear if they think it's necessary. They already tried that, Daniel pointed out, and they'll try again, which is why we need to move fast. Ethan had been quietly listening from the kitchen doorway, and now he spoke up with the directness that only children could manage. Are you going to protect us or not? Director Walsh looked at the 11-year-old with obvious respect. Son, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you and your family safe. But I need you to understand that some of the people we're fighting have access to resources that make this very difficult. What kind of resources? The kind that allow them to find out where witness protection relocates people. The kind that let them access federal databases and track movements. The kind that mean nowhere is completely safe. Daniel felt his heart sink as he realized what Walsh was telling them. Even witness protection might not be enough to keep them alive if the corruption reached high enough into the federal system. So we're screwed, Emily said flatly. Not necessarily, Walsh replied. There's one more option we haven't discussed, which is, you testify, then you disappear. Not witness protection, not federal programs, just disappear. New identities that we create outside the system, relocation sought to a place the corrupted officials can't access. That sounds like the same thing as witness protection, Daniel said. It's not. Witness protection is an official program with records, protocols, oversight. What I'm talking about is completely off the books. As far as the government would be concerned, you'd simply vanish. Emily considered this for a long moment. And afterward, if we ever wanted to come back, resume our real lives, you couldn't. Ever. Daniel Cross, Emily Harper, and Ethan Cross would cease to exist. You'd be new people with new histories, and you could never go back. The weight of the decision settled on Daniel's shoulders like a physical burden. Give up everything, their names, their histories, their connection to everyone they'd ever known, in exchange for safety from people who were supposed to protect them. How long do we have to decide? He asked. 24 hours, Walsh replied. After that, I can't guarantee I'll be able to offer this option. The corrupted elements are moving to shut down our operation. As the federal agents prepared to leave, Emily pulled Daniel aside for a private conversation. I know what you're thinking, she said quietly. You're thinking about Ethan, about what this would mean for his future. Wouldn't you? Of course. But I'm also thinking about all the other kids who might die if we don't stop these people. The corruption network has been responsible for thousands of deaths, Daniel. Drug dealers who thought they had official protection, cops who got too close to the truth, innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. I know, but Ethan is my son, my responsibility. And he's going to grow up in a world shaped by whether we're brave enough to do the right thing here. Daniel looked at his son, who was helping Agent Chen pack up the files on the coffee table. Ethan was trying to be helpful, trying to be brave, but Daniel could see the fear and uncertainty in the boy's eyes. "What do you think Trevor would want you to do?" Daniel asked. Emily's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. He'd want justice. He'd want the people who killed him to pay, and he'd want to make sure no other cops died the way he did. Even if it meant sacrificing our safety. Especially then. Trevor believed that some things were worth dying for. Truth, justice, the idea that good people could make a difference. Daniel nodded, understanding, but not yet ready to make the decision that would determine the rest of their lives. That night, after the federal agents had left and the media circus had temporarily dispersed, Daniel sat on his back porch with a cup of coffee and tried to process everything that had happened. The mountains around his home were peaceful in the moonlight, unchanged by the human drama that had played out in their shadow. Ethan joined him, carrying his own mug of hot chocolate and wearing the serious expression that had become his default since that terrible night. "Dad, are we going to have to become different people?" "Maybe, buddy. How would you feel about that?" Ethan considered the question with the gravity of someone much older. "Would I still be your son? Always. No matter what names we have or where we live, you'll always be my son." "Then I guess the rest doesn't matter so much." Daniel pulled his son close, marveling at the resilience and wisdom the boy had developed through trauma that would have broken many adults. "What about Emily?" Ethan asked. "Would she come with us?" "I don't know. That would be her choice." "I think she should. She's part of our family now, even if we're not related by blood." Daniel realized his son was right. Somewhere between pulling Emily from that wrecked police cruiser and fighting for their lives against cartel assassins, she'd become more than just a witness they were protecting. She'd become part of their unit, part of their family. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think she is." The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. The next morning, as Director Walsh waited for their answer, Daniel looked at Emily and Ethan and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. "We'll testify," he told the FBI director, "and then we'll disappear, all three of us." Emily's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. "Together." "Together," Daniel agreed. Walsh nodded with obvious relief. "The testimony is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Closed session, maximum security. After that, Daniel Cross, Emily Harper, and Ethan Cross cease to exist," Emily finished. "And 3 new people begin their lives somewhere far away from all this," Daniel added. As they began planning for their final day as themselves, Daniel realized that sometimes the greatest victory was simply surviving to fight another day. They'd lost everything, their home, their identities, their connection to the past, but they'd gained something too. They'd found each other, and they'd found the courage to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. In a world full of corruption and compromise that was worth more than any amount of safety or comfort. The war veteran, the wounded cop, and the brave boy were about to disappear forever. But their legacy would live on in the justice they'd helped bring to those who thought themselves untouchable. Tomorrow would bring the end of everything they'd known, but it would also bring the beginning of something new. A family forged in fire and blood, bound together by truth and tested by adversity. They were ready for whatever came next. The federal courthouse in Denver looked like a fortress in the pre-dawn darkness, its granite walls and barred windows designed to keep the world's worst criminals inside and their vengeful associates outside. Daniel had seen similar buildings in Afghanistan, structures built to withstand sieges, places where justice was dispensed, behind walls thick enough to stop bullets and bombs. Today, those walls would protect them, while they testified against some of the most powerful people in America. "Nervous?" Emily asked, as their armored FBI transport wound through the security checkpoints surrounding the courthouse. She was wearing a conservative blue suit that made her look more like a federal prosecutor than a small-town police officer. But Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed against her purse. "Terrified," Daniel admitted. He'd faced Taliban fighters and cartel assassins, but somehow the prospect of sitting in front of federal judges and lawyers felt more intimidating than armed combat. Ethan was pressed against the bulletproof window, watching the early morning commuters who had no idea they were witnessing history in the making. "Look at all the news trucks," the 11-year-old observed. "There must be 50 of them." Director Walsh, sitting across from them in the transport, nodded grimly. "The media knows something big is happening, but they don't know the details. We've managed to keep the witness list sealed, but that won't last much longer." "How many people are we testifying against?" Emily asked. 47 defendants across 6 states, Walsh replied, consulting a thick file. "Federal judges, prosecutors, DEA agents, local law enforcement officials, even a few politicians. The biggest corruption case in American history." Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. 47 lives would be destroyed by their testimony, 47 families torn apart. But then he thought about Trevor Harper, murdered for trying to do his job, and Shadow, who died protecting strangers from corrupt cops and cartel killers. "They made their choices," he said quietly. The courthouse's underground garage was a maze of concrete and steel, designed to move high-value prisoners and witnesses without exposing them to public view. Federal marshals in full tactical gear escorted them through multiple security checkpoints, each one more elaborate than the last. "This is insane," Ethan whispered, as they passed through metal detectors, bomb scanners, and what looked like military-grade screening equipment. "This is necessary," Walsh corrected. "We've intercepted 3 separate assassination plots in the past 24 hours. The people you're testifying against have friends with very long reach." The witness room was sterile and windowless, furnished with government-issued chairs and a table that looked like it had been stolen from a high school cafeteria. But it was secure, and right now security mattered more than comfort. "The grand jury session begins in 1 hour," Walsh explained, spreading documents across the table. "You'll testify separately, Daniel first, then Emily, then we'll bring Ethan in for a brief session about what he witnessed." "How long will this take?" Daniel asked. "Could be all day. The prosecutors want to be thorough, and the defense attorneys will try to poke holes in your testimony." Emily was reviewing her notes, the same evidence files she'd been studying for months. "What about Morrison and his friend? Are they going to try to interfere?" Walsh's expression darkened. "Morrison has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His credentials were legitimate, but his presence at your home was completely unauthorized. So he was acting on his own, or on behalf of people who can't afford to have their names attached to official visits. Either way, he won't be a problem today." The first sign of trouble came 20 minutes before Daniel was scheduled to testify. Agent Chen burst into the witness room, her face pale with urgency. "We have a problem," she announced. "Someone leaked the witness list to the media." Through the courthouse's reinforced windows, Daniel could see the media circus exploding into chaos. News helicopters circled overhead while reporters pressed against the security barriers, shouting questions and demands for comment. "How bad is it?" Walsh asked. "Every major network is running breaking news alerts. CNN has your photos on screen right now, identifying you as the key witnesses in the federal corruption case." Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. Their faces were now known to millions of people, including anyone who might want them dead. "Can we postpone?" Emily asked. "Postponing would be even more dangerous," Walsh replied. "Every hour we delay gives the defendants more time to plan countermeasures. We proceed as scheduled." The walk to the grand jury room felt like a death march through a maze of armed federal marshals and metal detectors. Daniel had testified in military tribunals before, but this was different. This was civilian justice with all its procedures and protections, but also with all its vulnerabilities. The grand jury room was smaller than Daniel had expected, filled with 23 ordinary citizens who would decide whether the evidence warranted criminal charges. They looked like people you'd meet at a grocery store or PTA meeting, but their decision would determine the fate of one of the largest corruption networks in American history. "Please state your name for the record," the federal prosecutor began. "Daniel William Cross." Daniel replied, his voice steadier than he felt. For the next 3 hours, Daniel recounted the events of that snowy night in excruciating detail. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, guided him through the timeline with surgical precision. "Mr. Cross, when you discovered Officer Harper in the police cruiser, what was her condition?" "Unconscious, severely injured. Her leg was trapped under the dashboard, and she was bleeding from a head wound." "Did you observe any evidence that the crash was not accidental?" "Yes, the rear window was blown out from the inside, and there were impact marks on the bumper consistent with another vehicle ramming her cruiser." "What happened when you brought Officer Harper to your home?" Daniel described the firefight with Rodriguez and his deputies, the arrival of the cartel soldiers, the death of Shadow and the corrupt sheriff. The grand jurors listened with rapt attention, some taking notes, others simply staring in disbelief. "Mr. Cross, during the confrontation with Miguel Valenzuela, did he make any statements about the scope of his organization's corruption network?" "He said they owned everyone in Millbrook County. Sheriffs, deputies, even judges. He claimed it was a business arrangement that kept the county safe." "Did Sheriff Rodriguez make any statements about his relationship with the cartel?" "He said the cartels don't give you choices. You work with them or you die. He claimed he was protecting his community by making a deal with devils." Martinez nodded, consulting her notes. "Mr. Cross, I want to direct your attention to the evidence Officer Harper shared with you about her husband's murder. What did she tell you about Detective Trevor Harper's investigation?" Daniel recounted Emily's story about Trevor's undercover work, his discovery of the corruption network, and his murder by the very cops he was investigating. The grand jurors' expressions grew increasingly grim as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "Thank you, Mr. Cross. No further questions." The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal but predictable. He tried to paint Daniel as an unstable war veteran with PTSD, suggested that his account of events was colored by military paranoia, and implied that the evidence against his clients was circumstantial at best. "Mr. Cross, you've been treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, haven't you?" "Yes." "And you've experienced nightmares, flashbacks, episodes of hypervigilance?" "Yes, but that doesn't mean—" "Just answer the questions, Mr. Cross. On the night in question, you'd been drinking, hadn't you?" "I had 2 beers with dinner. I was completely sober." "But you were under stress, worried about your son dealing with a blizzard that had already forced you to abandon your vehicle." Daniel saw where this was going. I was alert and functioning normally. Is it possible that your perception of events was colored by your military training and combat experience, that you might have interpreted a confused situation as a coordinated attack? 4 men with badges and guns broke down my front door in the middle of the night. That's not a misperception, that's home invasion. The defense attorney pressed on, but Daniel could see the grand jurors weren't buying it. They'd heard too much evidence, seen too many corroborating documents to dismiss the testimony as the delusions of a damaged veteran. When Daniel finally left the witness stand, he felt like he'd been through another firefight. Emily was waiting in the hallway, and she squeezed his hand as he passed. "How was it?" she asked. "Brutal but necessary," Daniel replied. "Your turn." Emily's testimony was even more powerful than Daniel's, filled with the technical details of police procedure and the personal anguish of a widow seeking justice for her murdered husband. She walked the grand jury through Trevor's investigation, his discovery of the corruption network, and the events leading to his death. "Officer Harper, can you describe the evidence your husband collected before his murder?" Financial records showing payments from known cartel associates to law enforcement officials. Photographs of Sheriff Rodriguez meeting with Miguel Valenzuela. Audio recordings of conversations between corrupt cops and cartel representatives. How did your husband obtain this evidence? He was conducting an authorized undercover investigation into drug trafficking in Millbrook County. What he discovered was far more extensive than anyone expected. And what happened when he tried to report his findings? Emily's voice broke slightly. He was murdered 3 days before he was scheduled to meet with federal investigators. Shot 6 times and left in an alley like a common criminal. The defense attorney tried to discredit Emily's testimony by suggesting she was motivated by revenge rather than justice, that her undercover work was unauthorized, and that her evidence was obtained illegally. But Emily held her ground, her credentials as a law enforcement officer lending weight to every word. "Officer Harper, isn't it true that you conducted surveillance and gathered evidence without proper warrants? I was working undercover in an official capacity investigating credible allegations of corruption. Everything I did was within the scope of my authority as a police officer. But you were emotionally compromised by your husband's death. How can we trust your judgment in that state?" Emily's green eyes flashed with controlled anger. "My husband was murdered by corrupt cops who were taking cartel money. If being angry about that compromises my judgment, then I guess I'm compromised. But the evidence speaks for itself." When Emily finished her testimony, she looked drained but triumphant. The most difficult part was over now. It was Ethan's turn. The prosecutors had debated whether to call an 11-year-old boy as a witness, but Ethan had insisted he wanted to testify. "They killed Shadow," he'd said, with the fierce determination that made Daniel proud and heartbroken in equal measure. "Someone needs to speak for him." Ethan's testimony was brief but devastating. In his clear young voice, he described watching armed men break into his home, seeing his dog die protecting strangers, and being forced to defend his family with a weapon no child should ever have to hold. "Ethan, can you tell us what happened when the men came to your house?" "They broke down our door and pointed guns at us. Shadow tried to protect Officer Harper and they shot him, so I had to help Dad fight them off." "Were you scared?" "Yeah, but Dad taught me that sometimes you have to do scary things to protect people you love. Shadow wasn't even our dog originally, but he died protecting us anyway." The defense attorney wisely chose not to cross-examine a child who'd watched his dog die protecting a wounded police officer. Even corrupt officials had limits on how low they'd sink in public. As the grand jury deliberated, Daniel, Emily, and Ethan waited in the secure witness room, while federal marshals monitored threats and media coverage. The news was not encouraging. Protests had erupted outside courthouses in 3 states, as supporters of the accused officials claimed the whole case was a federal conspiracy. "They're calling us liars," Ethan observed, watching a television news report showing angry crowds demanding the witnesses' names be released. "They're scared," Emily replied. "When people's heroes turn out to be villains, they'd rather attack the messengers than accept the truth." "What happens if the grand jury doesn't believe us?" Daniel asked. Walsh shook his head. "They'll believe you. The evidence is overwhelming. But even if they vote to indict, this is just the beginning. The actual trials will take years. Years we'll spend hiding underground with new identities. Years you'll spend alive," Walsh corrected, "which is more than we can guarantee if you stay in the open." The grand jury reached their decision in less than 2 hours. True Bill's indictments were returned against 45 of the 47 defendants. 2 minor officials escaped charges due to insufficient evidence, but everyone else would face federal prosecution. "It's over," Emily said, as they watched the news coverage of arrests being made across 6 states. "No," Daniel replied, looking at his son, who was finally allowing himself to smile for the first time in weeks. "It's just beginning." That night, their last night as Daniel Cross, Emily Harper, and Ethan Cross, they stayed in a federal safe house outside Denver. Tomorrow they would receive new identities and begin new lives in a place the corrupted officials could never find them. But tonight, they were still themselves, still the family that had been forged in fire and blood on a snowy mountain in Colorado. "Are you ready for this?" Daniel asked Emily as they sat on the safe house porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been ready since the night Trevor died," she replied. "The question is whether you're ready to have a federal agent as part of your family." "Former federal agent," Daniel corrected. "And yes, I think I can handle that." Ethan joined them on the porch, carrying a small wooden box that contained Shadow's collar and tags. "Should we bury this with our old names?" Daniel considered the question seriously. Shadow had been part of their old life, but he'd also been the bridge between Emily's past and their shared future. The dog had recognized Emily as his former partner's widow and had died protecting all of them. "No," Daniel said finally. "Shadow comes with us. He's part of our family story, no matter what names we have." "Good," Ethan said, hugging the box to his chest. "He shouldn't be forgotten." Emily reached over and took both their hands, her fingers intertwining with theirs, in a gesture that felt like a promise. "Whatever happens tomorrow, wherever we end up, we're together. The 3 of us against the world." "The 3 of us," Daniel agreed. As the last light faded from the Colorado sky, they sat in comfortable silence, saying goodbye to the people they'd been, and preparing to become the people they needed to be. The war veteran, the wounded cop, and the brave boy who'd lost his dog were about to disappear forever. But somewhere else, under different names and in a different place, a family would begin again. They'd carry the scars of their old lives and the strength that had gotten them through the darkness. They'd remember Trevor Harper and Shadow the good cop and the loyal dog who died for justice. And they'd know that sometimes the greatest victory was simply surviving, to see another sunrise, to have another chance at happiness, to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had been destroyed. The next morning brought federal marshals with new documents, new identities, and a new future. As Daniel signed papers that officially ended his existence as Daniel Cross, he realized he wasn't losing himself. He was becoming someone new, someone shaped by everything he'd experienced, but not defined by it. Emily was already studying her new identification, memorizing the details of a life she'd never lived, but would now have to inhabit completely. Her new name was Sarah Mitchell, and according to her documents, she was a former insurance investigator with no connection to law enforcement. Ethan's new name was Michael Mitchell, and he was now Emily's adopted son rather than Daniel's biological child. The paperwork showing Daniel's new identity as Robert Mitchell, a former Army medic turned contractor, was impeccable. "The Mitchell family," Emily said, testing the words. "I like it." "Dad," Ethan said, then corrected himself. "Rob, that's going to take some getting used to." "We'll practice." "Daniel now," Robert replied. "We have time." Their new home was a small town in Montana, far enough from Colorado to be safe, but similar enough in climate and culture that they wouldn't feel completely displaced. Robert Mitchell had a job waiting at a veterans rehabilitation center. Sarah Mitchell would work for a local insurance company, and Michael Mitchell would attend the town's well-regarded middle school. As their transport vehicle pulled away from the safe house, Daniel took one last look at the Colorado mountains that had been his home for 15 years. He was leaving behind his military service records, his marriage to Ethan's mother, his entire history as Daniel Cross. But he was taking the most important things with him, his son, and the woman who'd become his partner in every sense of the word. They'd survived corruption that reached the highest levels of government cartel assassins, who killed for money, and federal officials who'd betrayed their oaths of office. Whatever challenges Montana presented, they'd face them together. The town of Glacier Falls. Montana population 8,500 sat in a valley surrounded by mountains that reminded them of home without being identical to it. The house the federal government had purchased for them was modest, but comfortable with enough land for privacy and a view that would never get old. "It's perfect," Emily, now Sarah, said as they walked through their new home for the first time. "Ethan can have a normal childhood here." "Michael," Ethan corrected automatically. "And I don't know if I'll ever be normal after everything that's happened." "Normal is overrated," Daniel, now Robert, replied. "Besides, you're stronger than most adults I've served with. That's not normal, but it's not bad either." Their first few weeks in Glacier Falls were an adjustment period filled with small challenges and unexpected joys. Learning to respond to new names, memorizing false histories, and integrating into a community that had no idea what they'd been through. Robert's job at the Veterans Center put him in contact with other former soldiers dealing with trauma and readjustment. It felt good to help people who understood the weight of carrying invisible wounds, and he found that his own healing accelerated as he focused on helping others. Sarah's work investigating insurance fraud was mundane compared to hunting cartel corruption, but it kept her investigative skills sharp while providing the comfortable anonymity they all needed. Michael enrolled in Glacier Falls Middle School as a 7th grader with a mysterious past and a maturity that impressed his teachers. He made friends cautiously, but genuinely slowly, learning to trust that not everyone in authority was corrupt. 3 months into their new lives, they received word through secure channels that the trials in Colorado were proceeding. 38 defendants had pled guilty in exchange for reduced sentences, while 9 others were fighting the charges in court. Rodriguez pled out, Sarah informed them after decoding a message from Director Walsh. 25 years in federal prison. Morrison got 15 years for obstruction of justice. "What about the judges and federal officials?" Robert asked. "Most of them took plea deals rather than face public trials. Judge Harrison got 12 years. DEA Deputy Director Walsh, no relation to our Director Walsh, got 20 years. "It's over then," Michael said. "The trials are over," Sarah corrected. "But the impact of what we did will last for decades. 45 corrupt officials exposed, dozens of ongoing cartel operations disrupted, and a message sent that corruption has consequences. Robert nodded, feeling a satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal revenge and everything to do with justice finally being served. Trevor Harper's murder had been avenged, Shadow's sacrifice had meaning, and the corruption network that had terrorized an entire county was destroyed. As their first year in Glacier Falls passed, the Mitchell family found their rhythm. Robert's work at the Veterans Center earned him respect in the community. Sarah's insurance investigations helped local businesses, and Michael's academic achievements made them proud. But more importantly, they found peace. The nightmares that had plagued them all after that terrible night gradually faded, replaced by dreams of a future built on hope rather than survival. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset over the Montana mountains, Michael asked the question they'd all been thinking. "Do you ever regret it, giving up our old lives?" Robert considered the question seriously. They'd lost everything, their names, their histories, their connections to the past. But they'd gained something invaluable, the knowledge that they'd stood up to corruption at the highest levels and won. "No," he said finally. "Daniel Cross was a good man, but he was defined by his wounds. Robert Mitchell gets to be defined by what he builds." Sarah, who would always be Emily in his heart, smiled and took his hand. "Besides, some families are born and some are made. We made this family by choosing each other, by fighting for each other. That makes it stronger than anything based on blood alone." Michael nodded, understanding more than any 13-year-old should about the bonds forged by shared trauma and mutual sacrifice. "Shadow would have liked it here," he said quietly. "All this space to run all these mountains to explore." "Yeah," Robert agreed. He would have. As the stars emerged over Glacier Falls, Montana, the family that had once been Daniel Cross, Emily Harper, and Ethan Cross settled into the comfortable silence of people who'd found their place in the world. They'd lost everything and gained everything, died as one family, and been reborn as another. The war veteran, the wounded cop, and the brave boy had become the contractor, the investigator, and the student. Different names, different histories, but the same courage that had carried them through the darkness into the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new memories to replace the ones they'd left behind. But tonight, they were simply a family watching the sunset from their front porch, grateful to be alive and together in a world where justice had finally prevailed. They'd paid the price for standing up to corruption, but they'd also reaped the reward of knowing they'd made a difference. Somewhere in Colorado, other families were safer because of their sacrifice. Other cops could do their jobs without fear of corrupt superiors. Other communities were free from the shadow of cartel influence. The Mitchell family had found their happy ending not in the restoration of their old lives, but in the courage to build new ones. They were living proof that sometimes the greatest victory was simply the chance to start over, to become better versions of themselves, to find love and purpose in the aftermath of loss. The mountains of Montana stretched endlessly into the distance, promising adventures yet to come, and a future limited only by their imagination. They were no longer running from their past, they were walking confidently toward their future, hand in hand, heart to heart, family to family. 2 years had passed since the Mitchell family had settled into their new life in Glacier Falls, and the changing seasons had become a metaphor for their own transformation. Spring brought new growth, summer offered warmth and abundance, fall reminded them of life's cycles, and winter no longer brought terror and violence but peace and reflection. Robert stood in his kitchen on a snowy December morning, watching Sarah help Michael with his algebra homework at the breakfast table. The domestic scene felt miraculous after everything they'd endured. The boy, now 15 and growing tall like his father, had adapted to his new identity with the resilience that continued to amaze Robert every day. "Dad, there's someone at the door," Michael called out, using the word that came naturally now, though Sarah had legally adopted him as Michael Mitchell 6 months after their arrival in Montana. Through the frosted window, Robert could see a familiar figure standing on their front porch. Agent Sarah Chen, looking older and more weathered than when they'd last seen her, but wearing the same determined expression that had carried them through their darkest hours. "It's Chen," Robert told Sarah, who immediately stiffened. "What does she want?" Sarah asked, her investigator instincts never far from the surface, even in their peaceful new life. Robert opened the door to find Chen stamping snow off her boots, her breath forming clouds in the bitter Montana air. She was alone, which was either a very good sign or a very bad one. "Robert, Sarah, Michael." Chen nodded to each of them, using their new names without hesitation. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Agent Chen," Robert replied carefully. "It's been a while. Is everything all right?" "That depends on your definition of all right." Chen stepped inside, accepting the cup of coffee Sarah offered, while her eyes took in their comfortable home. "You've built a good life here." "We've tried," Sarah said, settling beside Michael at the table while maintaining the protective posture Robert had noticed she'd never quite abandoned. "What brings you to Montana?" Chen sipped her coffee, and Robert could see her weighing her words carefully. "The corruption trials are finally over. All of them. The last appeals were rejected by the Supreme Court 3 weeks ago. And," Robert prompted, "43 convictions. 2 acquittals on technicalities, but those individuals have been fired and blacklisted from federal service. The network is completely dismantled." Michael looked up from his homework. "So it's really over?" "The legal proceedings are over," Chen confirmed. "But that's not why I'm here." The familiar chill of apprehension settled over Robert's shoulders. "What is it?" "Director Walsh is dead." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Director Frank Walsh had been their lifeline during the investigation, the federal official who'd shepherded them through the witness protection process and ensured their safety during the transition to new identities. "How?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Car accident 3 months ago. Single vehicle, icy roads, no witnesses." Chen's expression suggested she found the official explanation as unsatisfying as they did. "His replacement has been reviewing various off-books operations, including ours," Robert said, understanding immediately. "The new director doesn't approve of unofficial witness relocations. He's ordered a comprehensive audit of all irregular protection cases from the past 5 years. Sarah leaned forward, her protective instincts fully engaged. "What does that mean for us?" "It means your new identities, which exist outside official witness protection programs, are being flagged as security risks. There are people in the Justice Department who want to know where Daniel Cross, Emily Harper, and Ethan Cross disappeared to." "But we're not those people anymore," Michael said, with the logic of someone who'd grown up understanding the importance of new identities. "Legally, that's correct," Chen agreed. "But practically, there are still people who remember your faces, people who might want revenge for the convictions your testimony secured." Robert felt the old familiar weight of impending danger settling on his family. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you have a choice to make." Chen reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "The official option is to enter traditional witness protection. New location, new identities, again, complete federal oversight." "And the unofficial option," Sarah asked, "you stay here. You keep the identities you've built. But you do it without any federal protection or support. If someone comes looking for you, you're on your own." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Robert looked around at the life they'd built in Glacier Falls, their home, their jobs, Michael's school, and friends. The thought of starting over again, of forcing their son to abandon another identity and another community, felt like a form of torture. "There's a third option," Chen added quietly. "One that Director Walsh arranged before his death, though it wasn't in any official files." "What kind of option?" Chen opened the envelope and spread its contents across their kitchen table. Legal documents, financial records, and official-looking certificates that Robert didn't immediately recognize. Full pardons for any irregularities in your identity changes signed by the previous Attorney General before he left office. Legal recognition of your new identities as legitimate. And, Chen smiled for the first time since arriving, a rather substantial reward payment for your service to the federal government. Sarah picked up one of the financial documents, her eyes widening as she read the numbers. This is $3 million. Compensation for your undercover work, Emily. Sarah. Hazard pay for extraordinary service to federal law enforcement. Plus damages for the loss of your previous life and property. Robert stared at the documents, hardly believing what he was seeing. This makes our new identities completely legal. More than legal. Official. The Mitchell family exists in every government database with complete histories going back decades. Birth certificates, school records, military service, documentation for Robert law enforcement, credentials for Sarah. Everything. Michael was reading over Sarah's shoulder, his mathematical mind quickly grasping the implications. "We're real now. Officially real." "You were always real," Chen corrected gently. "But now you're also legal." The relief that washed over Robert was so intense it left him dizzy. For 2 years they'd lived with the constant fear that their new identities might be discovered, that some bureaucratic investigation might expose them and force them to run again. "Why?" he asked. "Why did Walsh do this?" "Because he believed you deserved better than spending your lives hiding from people who should have been protecting you." Chen gathered the documents back into a neat stack, and because he knew there might come a time when the official system would try to betray you again. Sarah was studying the legal pardons with the eye of someone who'd spent years investigating fraud. These are legitimate. Federal court stamps proper signatures, completely legal. Walsh had powerful friends in the Justice Department, Chen explained. People who believed in doing the right thing even when it wasn't politically convenient. They made sure your sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten or discarded. "What about you?" Michael asked Chen. "Are you in trouble for bringing us this, Chen's smile was sad but genuine. "I'm retiring next month. 25 years with the Bureau, and I'm tired of fighting corruption from the inside. There's a private investigation firm in Seattle that's offered me a partnership." "Will you be safe?" Sarah asked with genuine concern. "Safer than I've been in years. The corruption network you helped expose had tentacles everywhere, including the FBI. With them gone, the Bureau is actually functional again." As Chen prepared to leave, she turned back to the family that had sacrificed everything to do the right thing. "You should know," she said quietly, "that your testimony didn't just convict corrupt officials. It saved lives. The drug interdiction operations that have been conducted since the network was dismantled have prevented an estimated 2,000 overdose deaths. The honest cops who can now do their jobs without fear have solved hundreds of cases that were being buried by corruption." "And Trevor," Sarah asked, "has he been recognized?" Detective Trevor Harper was posthumously awarded the Medal of Valor, the highest honor for law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. There's a memorial in Denver with his name on it, honoring officers who died fighting corruption. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the first time Robert had seen her cry since those terrible first weeks after the courthouse testimony. But these were tears of relief and closure, not grief and anger. "He would have been proud of you," Chen told her. "All of you. You finished what he started." After Chen left, the Mitchell family sat around their kitchen table looking at the documents that had officially made them real. The financial compensation would secure Michael's college education and their retirement, but more importantly, the legal recognition meant they could stop looking over their shoulders. "So, what now?" Michael asked. "Do we stay here? Do we go somewhere else? Do we tell people who we really are?" Robert considered the questions seriously. They had choices now, real choices, not just survival decisions. They could stay in Glacier Falls and continue building their life as the Mitchell family, or they could move somewhere new and start fresh with their official identities. "What do you want to do?" he asked his wife and son. Sarah took his hand, her engagement ring purchased under their new names, catching the morning light. They'd been married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony at the Glacier Falls courthouse, making their family legal as well as emotional. "I want to stay here," she said. "This is home now. These are our friends, our community. The Mitchell family belongs in Glacier Falls. Even though we could go anywhere, be anyone, especially because we could go anywhere," Michael added. "We're choosing to stay here because we want to, not because we have to. That makes it different." Robert nodded, understanding. The difference between hiding and choosing was everything. They weren't the Mitchell family because they were running from Daniel Cross, Emily Harper, and Ethan Cross. They were the Mitchell family because they'd chosen to become those people. "There's something else," Robert said, pulling out a letter he'd been carrying for weeks, but hadn't known how to share. "The VA hospital in Billings offered me a position as head of their PTSD treatment program. It would mean more money, more responsibility, a chance to help more veterans." "That's 2 hours away," Sarah pointed out. "Which is why I turned it down. But now—" Robert gestured to the legal documents that had changed everything. "Now we have options. We could move to Billings, or I could commute a few days a week, or we could stay here and I could consult with them remotely." "What do you want to do?" Sarah asked, echoing his earlier question. Robert looked around their kitchen, taking in the family photos on the refrigerator. The homework scattered across the table, the comfortable clutter of a home that was truly lived in. This house had given them sanctuary when they needed it most, and Glacier Falls had provided the anonymity that allowed them to heal. But they were healed now, or as healed as they were going to get. The nightmares were rare, the hypervigilance had faded to normal caution, and the fear that had dominated their first year in Montana was gone. "I want to help more people," he said finally. "Veterans who are dealing with what I dealt with. If I can use what I've learned to help them find their way back to normal life." "Then that's what we'll do," Sarah said immediately. "We'll figure out the logistics later." Michael was already calculating possibilities. Billings has a good high school, strong math and science programs, and it's not so far that we couldn't come back to visit. "You'd be willing to move again?" Robert asked his son. "Dad, I've learned that home isn't a place, it's the people you're with. As long as we're together, we can make anywhere home." The wisdom in those words, spoken by a 15-year-old who'd lost and found more than most adults, struck Robert with overwhelming pride and love. His son had learned the most important lesson life could teach, that family was the foundation everything else was built on. "Besides," Michael continued with a grin that reminded Robert of the boy's mother, "it'll be fun to be the new kid again. Except this time I'll actually be Michael Mitchell from the beginning." 3 months later, the Mitchell family packed their belongings into a moving truck for the second time in 3 years. But this move felt completely different from their desperate flight from Colorado. This was a family choosing their next adventure, not refugees running from danger. The veterans at the rehabilitation center in Glacier Falls threw Robert a going-away party, and the insurance company gave Sarah a glowing recommendation letter for her new position with a Billings firm. Michael's classmates signed his yearbook and promised to stay in touch through social media. "It's weird," Michael observed as they drove away from Glacier Falls toward their new home in Billings. "I'm actually sad to leave, but excited about where we're going." "That's what normal feels like," Sarah told him. "When you're not running from something, you can actually look forward to what's coming next." Robert caught her eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. Sarah Emily had come so far from the wounded, desperate woman he'd pulled from a wrecked police cruiser 4 years earlier. She'd found justice for her husband, peace for herself, and love with a new family that had chosen her as completely as she'd chosen them. Their new house in Billings was larger than their home in Glacier Falls, with enough space for Robert's home office and Sarah's investigation work. Michael's room had windows facing the Yellowstone River, and he'd already identified the best spots for fishing and hiking. But the most important addition to their new home was in the backyard, a small memorial garden where they'd finally been able to properly honor Shadow's memory. The German Shepherd's collar and tags were mounted on a stone marker, along with a plaque that read, "Shadow, loyal partner, faithful friend, true hero." "He would have loved it here," Michael said as they stood in the garden on their first evening in the new house. "Yeah," Robert agreed. "He would have." Robert's work at the Billings VA hospital was everything he'd hoped for and more. His experiences both in combat and in surviving the corruption conspiracy gave him unique insights into helping veterans who felt lost and betrayed by the systems that were supposed to protect them. "The thing about trauma," he told a group of young veterans during one of his first seminars, "is that it doesn't have to define you. It can teach you, strengthen you, help you understand what really matters. But it doesn't get to decide who you become." The veterans listened with the attention of people who recognized someone who'd walked the same dark paths they were navigating. Robert's credentials were impressive, but his authenticity was what reached them. "I'm not going to tell you it gets easier," he continued, "but I will tell you it gets different. The weight doesn't disappear, but you get stronger, and eventually you realize you can use that strength to help other people carry their own weight." After the seminar, a young Marine approached Robert with the same haunted look Robert remembered seeing in his own mirror years earlier. "Sir, my unit was ambushed in Afghanistan. I was the only survivor. How do you deal with that kind of guilt?" Robert looked at the young man and saw himself at 22 broken and angry and convinced that survival was somehow a betrayal of the dead. "You honor them," Robert said quietly. "You live the kind of life they would have wanted to live. You become the kind of person they believed you could be, and you help other people do the same thing." "But what if I don't know how?" "Then you learn. You ask for help. You accept that healing is a process, not an event. And you remember that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the first step toward becoming strong enough to help others." The conversation reminded Robert of his own journey from broken veteran to functioning family man to someone who could help others navigate their own darkness. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but it had led him to exactly where he needed to be. Sarah's work investigating insurance fraud had evolved into something more significant as well. Her law enforcement background and investigative skills had attracted the attention of federal agencies dealing with white-collar crime, and she'd been offered consultant positions on several high-profile cases. "It's funny," she told Robert over dinner one evening. "I spent 2 years trying to expose corruption in one small county, and now I'm helping investigate financial crimes across the entire Northwest." "Do you miss the badge?" Michael asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I miss the authority it gave me to help people. but I don't miss the politics, the bureaucracy, or the constant worry about whether my colleagues were honest. You're still helping people, Robert pointed out, just in a different way. And I'm doing it on my own terms with people I trust completely. She smiled at her family. That's worth more than any badge. Michael's adjustment to his new school and identity had been remarkably smooth. At 15, he was confident enough in who he was to handle the normal challenges of being a teenager without the additional burden of maintaining a false identity. It's weird, he told his parents after his first month at Billings High School. I keep waiting for someone to ask me about my past or why we moved here. But nobody really cares. They just accept that I'm Michael Mitchell from Montana. That's because you are Michael Mitchell from Montana, Sarah reminded him. That's not a false identity anymore. That's who you chose to become. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Agent Chen hadn't brought us those papers. If we'd had to keep living as unofficial people. We would have made it work, Robert said with confidence. We've made everything else work. But this is better. Yeah, Robert agreed. This is better. The 5th anniversary of that terrible night in Colorado arrived without fanfare. The date, December 15th, had once been marked by nightmares and anniversary reactions, but now it passed quietly, noted, but not celebrated or mourned. 5 years, Sarah said, as they sat on their back porch, watching snow fall over Shadow's memorial garden. Feels like a lifetime, Robert replied, but also like it happened yesterday. Do you ever think about going back to Colorado, I mean? To see the old house or visit Trevor's grave? Robert considered the question. They could go back now their new identities were solid enough to withstand casual scrutiny, and the legal troubles that had driven them into hiding were resolved. Maybe someday, he said. When Michael's older, when we're ready to show him where his story really began. Our story, Sarah corrected. It's all our story now. And Michael joined them on the porch, carrying 3 mugs of hot chocolate, and wearing the serious expression that meant he'd been thinking about something important. I've been wondering about something, he said, settling into the chair beside Shadow's memorial. Do you think we're different people now? I mean, are we the same people with new names? Or are we actually different people? It was a profound question from a young man who'd lived through more identity changes than most people experienced in a lifetime. Both, Robert said, after thinking about it. We're the same people at our core, same values, same love for each other, same willingness to do the right thing even when it's hard. But we're also different because of everything we've experienced. Daniel Cross was a broken veteran who didn't know how to be a father, Sarah added. Robert Mitchell is a healed veteran who's learned that strength comes from vulnerability and that family is the most important mission you can have. Emily Harper was a woman consumed by grief and the need for revenge, she continued. Sarah Mitchell is a woman who's found peace and purpose and love. And Ethan Cross was a kid who had his childhood stolen by adult corruption and violence. Michael said, understanding the pattern. Michael Mitchell is someone who's learned that trauma doesn't have to define you, that family isn't just about blood, and that sometimes the worst things that happen to you can lead to the best things in your life. Exactly, Robert said, putting his arm around his son. We're the same people made better by everything we've survived. As the snow continued to fall, the Mitchell family sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The war veteran, the wounded cop, and the brave boy who'd lost his dog had become the healer, the investigator, and the young man who understood that home was something you built with love and courage and hope. They'd lost everything and gained everything. They'd died as one family and been reborn as another. They'd learned that justice was possible, that love could overcome trauma, and that sometimes the ending of one story was really the beginning of another. The mountains surrounding Billings stretched into the distance, promising adventures yet to come, and a future limited only by their imagination and determination. They were no longer running from their past. They were walking confidently into their future hand in hand, heart to heart, family to family. In the memorial garden, Shadow's collar gleamed in the porch light, a reminder of the loyal dog who'd brought them together and died protecting strangers who became family. His sacrifice had meaning now, part of a larger story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demanded courage. The Mitchell family had found their happy ending not in the restoration of their old lives, but in the wisdom to build new ones. They were living proof that sometimes the greatest victory was simply the chance to start over, to become better versions of themselves, to find love and purpose in the aftermath of loss. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new memories to add to the collection they'd been building together. Robert would help more veterans find their way back to life. Sarah would investigate crimes and protect innocent people from predators, and Michael would continue growing into the remarkable young man his experiences had shaped him to become. But tonight, they were simply a family watching the snow fall, grateful to be alive, and together in a world where justice had finally prevailed. They'd paid the price for standing up to corruption, but they'd also reaped the reward of knowing they'd made a difference. Somewhere in America, other families were safer because of their sacrifice. Other cops could do their jobs without fear of corrupt superiors. Other communities were free from the shadow of organized crime. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in pristine white, and the Mitchell family sat together in the peace they'd earned through fire and blood and unwavering love. They were home, not the home they'd been born into, but the home they'd chosen to create. And in that choice, in that determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had been destroyed, they'd found the most important truth of all: that family was stronger than corruption. Love was more powerful than fear, and hope was the one thing no enemy could ever truly defeat. The story that had begun in a blizzard with a dying police officer and a loyal dog had become something much larger, a testament to the power of ordinary people to stand up to extraordinary evil and win. Not just survive, but win. Not just endure, but thrive. The Mitchell family had found their forever, and it was everything they'd ever dared to hope for, and more than they'd ever thought possible. In the end, that was enough. That was everything.